And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of Stripe Dev Chats. I'm CJ, and I'm joined by my colleague Mike and Colin from Clerk.dev. And we're really excited today because we're going to talk about authentication. And Colin has some really cool demos for us that we're going to go through all about authenticating your Stripe customers. And there's some really solid use cases in both the B2B and B2C spaces, especially if you have a React application, if you're writing Next.js. There's tons of great walkthroughs too in the Clerk.dev documentation. So if you head over there, you'll see options for Redwood.js, which we've got our friends over there at Redwood. I think we're super excited to pair with. But before we jump into that, we've got to go through some Stripe updates. So I'm going to let Mike jump in and go and talk about some of his tabs here that he's got ready to go about some upcoming Stripe things that were actually just launched. And I'll let you take it away, Mike.
Right on. Thanks, CJ. I'm going to make this just a little bigger, take up a little more of the space here, and maybe zoom in a little bit. So a couple of updates to go through. First of all, there's an updated API on payment requests called paymentRequest.canMakePayment. What this does is it returns a promise and async response that lets you know if a wallet is ready to make a payment. So this is helpful in cases where you need to check to see if someone has connected Apple Pay, Link, or Google Pay. And as you can see here, the syntax is pretty simple. I'm showing JavaScript right now, but what it gives you back is a dictionary, essentially a JSON object that shows Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Link, whether or not they're available to be used. Up next, redirect to checkout and on the Stripe API has been deprecated. So this was a method that you could use on the front end to redirect your users to checkout. It has since been deprecated because of our sort of preference for using server-side redirects for this scenario. Let's see, anything I missed there, CJ?
No, yeah, this was early in the early Stripe checkout days of the new Stripe checkout. This was the way that we recommended most users redirect to checkout. So you might either create a checkout session on the server and then pass its ID to the client and then redirect to checkout, or you could pass in this object that had line items and you would redirect to checkout client side. But we found that it just wasn't flexible enough to meet the user's needs. And so we stopped adding features to it a while ago, and now it's officially deprecated. So yeah, we definitely don't want to use the client-side version, because instead you can use the server-side version where you can just fire up a checkout session and redirect to its URL on the server side. So
bingo, exactly. So let me run through some of our other updates here. We have a new, actually, I'm going to zoom out on this to show it a little more in context. We have a new docs section on no code on stripe.com/docs. You'll see there's a new tab added to the top here that shows you all of Stripe's no code documentation in one place. So this is a new hub for no code documentation. It walks through all of the options for doing things with Stripe without writing code. So sort of configuration first, meant for people to get up and running quickly. And to get things done without having to go and spend a bunch of time writing code for specific use cases. I have taken a really strong stance on this, that I think this is really important for developers to adopt as early as possible. And when you outgrow no code things, you can start thinking about updating your integration with something that's a little more code heavy. If you haven't tried it before, this stuff is really tremendous. The pricing table is really cool. This is marked as some code here because it essentially generates a script tag that you need to embed on a page somewhere. So you need to be at least dangerous enough to do that. Payment links are really cool. You can create a URL that anyone can go to complete a purchase for any one of your products. Yeah, so check this out. Let us know what you think. No code scenarios are growing with Stripe. We see it as an important thing and something that's gaining a lot of traction in the developer ecosystem as well. Up next on Stripe Checkout, we have the ability to present local currencies. So what this means is that you can set up price objects on your products that have multiple currencies. In other words, you can set up a single product that, say, costs $100 US, and you can set specific prices for other currencies that will show their currencies in their sort of local conversion here. So if a user from the UK or the EU shows up and wants to make a purchase on my site, they'll see it in their local currency. I believe in the local currency as well, there is an opportunity here to set a automatic flag to enable the payment methods that are available in those locales too. So lots of flexibility here for working with currencies in different geographies and countries. couple events coming up. This is going to feel like I'm just plugging my own stuff for a minute here, but I promise you this is all about Stripe. So in November, I'm headed to the Caribbean Developers Conference in Punta Cana with Cecil, who's normally host of our dev chats here. We're going to be giving a session on going from zero to revenue with Stripe. With a friend of ours from the Dominican Republic who's growing a company there. His story is really cool, very interesting, super cool to hear about how he's grown his company using Stripe's products, as well as Stripe Atlas, which is one of our sort of product suites that you can use to incorporate a US-based company. And so that's how he's formed his business in the Dominican Republic. Super cool story. Looking forward to that event, and I hope to see you there. Also in November, that same week, October 30th to November 2nd, is All Things Open, the open source conference in Raleigh, North Carolina in the US. I'm giving a talk at All Things Open on Markdoc, which is our superset of Markdown. It is a open source system for adding functionality to Markdoc to make scalable dynamic pages. So actually, everything that I showed you before for Stripe documentation is all Markdoc powered. So all of this is created by our docs teams using Markdoc, and we created Markdoc to sort of solve this problem where documentation might need multiple languages, it might need reuse of content within it. There's functional dynamic content on the page where you can add things and whatnot. And so my talk here will be about the history of Markdoc and how you can use it on your sites. And I'm actually working to convert my own site to using Markdoc right now. So we'll have some use cases for that as well. So with that being said, I think that's the news updates for today. That brings us to my last tab going across the top here, which is Clerk. And that's why we've got our friend Colin here with us today to talk about clerk.dev. Colin, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm doing great. Why don't you start a little bit? Tell us about Clerk. Tell us about yourself, and then we can kind of get into the story here.
Yeah, absolutely. Me personally, I've just kind of always been a software developer, always had a side project going, and always kind of hated the auth step. I'd build this great product, and then I'd get to the auth step. I always hated it for two reasons. Either like it was too hard to do, or whatever I did just didn't feel good enough, and I didn't want to spend more time on it. And I think really the inspiration for Clerk was like looking at tools like Stripe Checkout, where like, hey, I get this whole UI and it's beautiful and it is really easy to use and great UX for my customers. But on the auth side, like that wasn't really there. Like I was never as happy with something. And so really with Clerk, we've deployed these React components that make it really easy to drop a beautiful UI into your application. For sign up, sign in, and user profile. Got to say that part.
Nice. So I was looking at some of the components, and I was seeing that like one of them is the user button or something that gives you like your avatar out of the box with some ways that you can sort of log in, log out, etc. That seems really handy. And one of the things too that I found with Clerk was that a lot of it was very React centric. So I'm curious, like when you're thinking about, as you're adding functionality to Clerk, are you focused primarily on React and just React, or is there like support for, Vue and Svelte and other, a bunch of other frameworks? And what can we expect in terms of front end support?
Yeah, so I guess where we stand right now is we have a React SDK, but the React SDK is a shim over just vanilla JavaScript. And so everything you do in the React SDK, you could do through window.clerk and ultimately make a Vue, a Svelte, whatever SDK as well. That is on our roadmap to get to as well, but we do have some brave souls that have built their own off of window.clerk, and you can get it going.
Very cool.
And the Clerk React SDK is all open source too, and so that's a good guiding light if someone's trying to do that.
Got it. Awesome. Should we jump into a demo here?
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to.
All right.
Great. So this is our homepage. I think Mike just had it up. The user button that CJ was referring to is this, and this is kind of just another kind of component of sign up, sign in UIs that we really wanted to bring to people and make it really easy. You've seen things like this before, probably, and so since it's a UI associated with Auth, we ship it. But we'll do a demo of that as well. In terms of what we're going to do from a foundation perspective, what I've done so far, I've created a new Next.js app. I have TypeScript turned on, really just for autocomplete, makes my life a little easier. And then I've also installed the Clerk Next.js package. And I should be able to start this up. One other thing I guess I prepared ahead of time is environment variables. So these are the keys from Stripe's dashboard. And then on this other tab, I'm actually signed in on the Clerk dashboard. And so we've set up this Stripe Dev Chats application within Clerk. And now we're going to install it on our local host. And so assuming this is running now.
Nice. This
is the Next.js Hello World. And I guess as the first step here, we will just put it behind a sign-in screen. I should say the API keys, they're just in the dashboard under API keys. That's where we copy pasted these from.
I noticed that nice little prefix of test underscore. I was
I don't know where we stole that from. Yes.
So
there's little tidbits of Stripe inspiration throughout.
Totally. Incidentally, our teammate Paul just published a blog post on dev.to. So if you're interested in learning more about object IDs generally and like how they work at Stripe and like why we have those prefixes, if you head over to dev.to/Stripe, there's excellent blog post about how we design those and why we start with those prefixes. And I love seeing it in the wild too, because it's like, okay, like that's actually really, really helpful, because when you see that prefix, you know for sure that is my test string. So this is
nice.
You have a similar. Okay.
We also wrote about how we did it.
Nice. Okay.
We predated you a little bit, but
you did.
Stripe's writing about it. You're going to steal my my SEO traffic. But no, absolutely. I actually have read that article, and the benefits are real. So nice. I do recommend, if you're building an API, to implement those prefixes.
Very cool.
Should I jump in here?
Let's keep going. Let's keep
going. All right. So if you've used Next.js before, underscore app.tsx, that's the entry point for the React application. And since we want to authenticate the whole application, that's where we're going to do a lot of our work. And so first thing we need to do is just pull in the Clerk provider. And this basically tells the component, which in this case is the page, about the user's auth state. If I just flip back here, nothing's actually changed yet. This isn't impacting the page at all. But now the auth state is available to the rest of the application. Next thing I'll pull in is the signed in component. And what this is saying is, okay, now let's only render this component if there's a user signed in. And so if I flip back now, that screen is blank. Other side of the coin, we need signed out. And I'll start just by putting hello signed out here.
Instant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Fast
cool.
Refresh really made this demo fantastic.
Yeah. Auth is done.
And now we've got our sign in. So I dropped sign in component. That's put the sign in.
Wow.
Out of the box, I guess I just had the default settings on. So there's sign in with Google here. If people want, they can come in and set up, any number of other social auth options. In dev, we can just use default keys. But then in production, you'll need to actually go through and set up your own kind of OAuth client keys.
Got it.
Well, we can sign in here.
So is that view too, the sign in? So that sign in component, how customizable is that in terms of the look and feel and colors and branding? And do you do that from your React code or from the dashboard, or where does that happen?
Yeah. So let's give it a try. So we got an appearance prop here.
Okay.
And is it command space? That's not it. Control space. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of options for customization, and I guess it works slightly similar to Stripe's appearance API. So if you're familiar with that, this will feel a little familiar. But let's get some variables first. So I always forget the IntelliSense thing. So if I wanted to just set like color primary, I think is something. Yeah, color primary. And I don't have a text code hand.
Oh my gosh. So Cassidoo has like a really funny page that's like all of the hex codes that are words, and they're all hilarious, but
I've ended up with a yellow that killed my contrast, but that's okay. So yeah, so variables is just like they're the cross-cutting variables. I couldn't think of another word. And so they impact the color of more than one thing. I'm actually just going to switch it to red for my own contrast concerns. But then what we also do that's, I suppose, slightly different than Stripe. Well, not, anyway, I'll let you decide if it's different after. But you can come here. Oh, wait, I went to a screen that other can't see. So every element here is addressable. And so if I want to take, why don't we take the form field input? And if I go back here, so not under variables, but elements, and form field input, I can like kill the border radius on this. So do border radius 0. Now we're getting square borders here. It actually works with anything. So if I were to go into like my global CSS and make a new class here, that's just foo, and do background color red, except that's CSS. Then I can say, hey, instead of just like targeting this one attribute here, let's append a class to our form field inputs, and we'll just append foo. And now if you look here, sorry. Well, first of all, I got the background color, but then you can also see that the foo ended up in the DOM. And so I guess what's different from Stripe, if you're really familiar with the internals, which I don't know how many will be, is that this is actually mounted directly into the DOM instead of in an iframe. And so you can actually, it's kind of a debate. I think no one knows the best way to build these components yet. And so I think that the mindset of like a Stripe approach where you have an iframe is like the component is entirely sandboxed. And so external styles can't pollute the component. But with Clerk, we were thinking about it and we were like, well, that's not really pollution. Like maybe they actually want their styles on. So this strategy, it's a little risky because of that. Like there's this intentional pollution going on. One example of that is like if I go into, we're totally going to have plenty of time to talk about. Like I was originally concerned this was going to go long, but we're really going in deep here. So if I set the font size on the body, that changes the rem. And so everything here is scaled off of rems. And so that's kind of the best example of like, okay, we're intentionally getting polluted. That'll work with like the font family as well.
Sure. So then the whole thing is themable, right? So you can make this feel like your brand. You could, have it blend in with everything else and not feel like like a wart that you put on top of your app that's from something else. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And I think with sign up and sign in particular, like our customers were really adamant, like it needs to be perfect. Yeah. Like just the variables didn't get us through because that's what we launched with. And so we needed to come up with this Like, no, you can actually edit the CSS of everything. Cool. So that's customization. I'll sign in now. I don't know if you caught that. It went through clerk.shared.lcl.dev. Those are the shared keys that we set up for people in development. But now that we're signed in, we're back to this hello world. From here, let's show off that user button. I guess I'll just drop it right above the component. I did import it. I don't know how that got in there.
So in one of the demos too, I saw that page props was being passed down into the Clerk provider. What is like the usefulness of that, or?
Yeah. So I'm not doing it here. You are right. If you go to our docs, we really streamline the Next.js stuff so that you get to it quickly. But basically in Next.js, because there's SSR, we ask for page props. And so by default, like what I'm doing right now, like there's no SSR turned on, so it doesn't matter. And that's why I didn't bother with it. But if you are using SSR, this basically ensures that like during the SSR run, that the user is actually signed in. And so this practically what it means is that during SSR, if you pass page props, then anything inside signed in will get rendered as expected if the user signed in. If you don't pass page props, this will actually gate the rendering because it needs the front end to decide if the user is signed in.
Got it.
Yes. So let me dumb that down to Next.js 101. And you can tell me if I'm misunderstanding, but the alternative is that means that if you didn't add the page props there, what could potentially happen when the page renders is it might not render part of the page briefly, or it might flash the signed out thing and then show you the signed in thing, which I've certainly experienced on plenty of sites, and is definitely one of those things that feels like maybe of an era of a certain sort of single page web app thing we went through when React was young. Is that more or less what would happen without that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's still some benefit. Like we actually have that flicker on our homepage right now, like wait an extra second for the sign in to run and or for the sign in button to display. And I guess like the trade-off is there's some speed things, right? So if you don't need the auth state, you can potentially get a page down to the user faster and then just kind of resolve the signed in state from the client side.
Right.
As I'm saying that, I'm convincing myself that that's not actually the case anymore, though. Yes, either way works.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's getting into the nerdy details a little bit, but the reason that that's important is because like Google ranks your page based on how quickly it renders to the user and whether it shifts, whether things on the page flash and come into existence as the page loads too. Yeah. Cool.
We found in practice, granted, don't look at our lighthouse scores right now. We found in practice that if it's just the sign up button in the upper right, and it's not triggering any layout shift, then it doesn't really impact those scores. But yeah, certainly you need to kill the layout shift no matter what you're doing. Make sure that there's space for that element to come in. But
cool. Colin, I have a more fundamental question here, I guess. It looks like your Next.js demo is using TypeScript. Will this all work for next projects that are just JavaScript? Yes.
Yeah. It all just still goes. It's just I like it for the IntelliSense.
Yeah, sure.
But like it was really helpful. I haven't memorized all of the elements and variables, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So it's great to just be able to pop it up and click it. But everything does work with JavaScript as well.
Very cool. Yeah, so at this point, you've added login to your page. You have, you've added maybe 10 lines of code, right? And suddenly we have logged in, logged out experience. You have some page content there that looks like it's loading directly from Clerk too.
this user button now.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got the whole user profile here.
Mm.
We know what device we're signed in on. I can actually go into the dashboard and turn on, let's see. I can turn on phone. I can turn on some MFA options. And then if I refresh this, let's see if I think I need to refresh. Some things you still need to refresh for. But now users can come in, they can set up QFA.
Wow. Yeah, cool.
Very cool.
It all just kind of comes out of the box. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to sort of like emphasize what just happened there from the perspective of, in a past life, I built a SaaS company, right? And like the things that you've just set up and added in 12 lines of code or whatever it is used to be like extremely arduous to do and trying, and required server-side code and middleware and APIs and all these things. And even then, like, I'm the first one to tell you that I'm not a security expert. So there was always some element of being uncertain as to whether or not it was done correctly, because there are a lot of things that can go wrong in the middle of these processes too. And so like thinking about one of these specific problems, like resetting your password if you forgot it, I can tell you I spent days making sure that I got that right, building apps in the past using pretty like well-known authentication providers. It was a whole ordeal to do for sure. And so like, I don't know, it's a blazing demo to kind of run through pretty quickly. And I just want to kind of pause and say, like, this is a really, really interesting application. And one of those things that is just like, the world in 2022 feels really awesome, but this used to be, I don't know, full-time work for a small team of engineers for quite a few weeks to get this kind of thing done.
Yeah. No, thanks so much for calling it out. It's really been a ton of fun seeing how much we can build into components versus kind of the old school API approach to developer tools. And like in your intro, you were showing all the no code stuff that Stripe's doing. And I think it's really all that same mindset of, hey, like once we actually get permission from the developer to show end users entire features instead of just Stripe.charge, show the checkout. It's such a powerful concept to just keep building on, and we're having a ton of fun.
Yeah,
doing it with Auth, and it's surprising how much surface area there is. I think a lot of people are kind of deceived originally by like, oh yeah, I pulled in this library and I got emails and passwords going pretty quickly.
Yeah. Can I ask some silly feature questions?
But sorry?
Can I ask you some silly feature questions based on being the guy who used to have to run these things? So let's say I came to you and explained to you that I threw my laptop in a lake and I can no longer get to my account to reset my password. Is there a way for you to go and send me a password reset email or something like that?
There is a way for our developer customers to do.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So the person who owns the application, can they go and like manage users from within the Clerk dev dashboard there? I
will say I've seen it. I'm not sure if it's landed on prod yet, but
sure.
Yeah, it's coming if it's not out.
Yeah, and you had a pretty staggering amount of Auth providers there too, which you kind of blazed through, like ticking a checkbox and suddenly Twitter appeared. But there's what, half a dozen different authenticators in there.
Yeah, and it's more. That's
amazing. Yeah, wow.
There's a lot.
Lots going on,
and it just keeps growing too. This one, we've gotten our cycle time on this down to like 2 hours. But now the longest part is waiting for the vendor to approve the test application. We've got some Web3 here.
Wow.
If you have like a new application and you have like an allow list, you don't want everyone to be able to sign up yet, you can get that going.
Sweet.
JWT templates are another big one for us, where basically these tools, they're all database tools. where they let you query from the front end. And kind of the minimum security that they need to be able to do that is they need to know which user is signed in. And so all of these companies in their documentation, they publish like, this is the form of JWT that you need to send me. And we kind of can generate those JWTs for someone. And so if I just create like a default Hasura one, I can come here and I'm just going to do it on window, but there's hooks for this as well. A token. Wait it. But so this is kind of ready in the form for Hasura to talk to a Hasura GraphQL endpoint. And so you can see it's got all these like Hasura claims in it. And so we do that with a bunch of database vendors. Auth has become rather far-reaching, I'd say, with React. I think with Stripe, we want to do more and more, talking very specifically, right? You brought up redirect to checkout. You move that from the client to the server. We would love to bring it back to the client because in a lot of cases, what people are doing is they go to the server just so that they can pass in a Stripe customer ID. In a lot of cases, like not all cases, but in a lot of cases, like that's the only thing you're getting populated in there. And since we know which user is signed in, we can do that on behalf and bring redirect to checkout back to the client. So there's a lot that we're like thinking through and kind of figuring out, hey, what is the best structure for a truly like modern take on Auth as a service? Because it's not just that login box anymore. There's so much more where user state is getting shared.
So I guess the next logical step from here, or at least like the one that is in my brain from doing so much Stripe stuff, is like, okay, how do we go make the API call to create the Stripe customer and then stuff that in this user model? And I saw a couple different fields in the API, but I was curious like what your official take is. Would you put that in like some metadata, or I saw like an external accounts property on the user too? So like, yeah.
So there are a couple ways to go about it. I think in practice, the most common way today is that people have like a Stripe customers table in their database, and that's like a join table, so a mapping of Clerk user ID to Stripe customer ID. Some people do store it on our user metadata. I guess I should show probably just the high level, like, okay, you have an API endpoint. How do you figure out what user is signed in? And we can do that pretty quickly here. So for all backend stuff on Next.js now, we actually use the new middleware. And I will go to Clerk docs and grab the snippet.
You've done this before.
You say that, but I think we launched this like last Monday. So
oh wow.
We launched the new middleware approach. So we've always had a way to get it from the back end, but we changed the DX a little bit. But yeah, so now if I go to, let's see, I think Next.js ships a default hello. So in here, if I do const user ID at Auth, didn't pop it up. All right. and then I pass it the request object, and then we'll just pass through, well, we'll just return the user ID here too. Let's see, is this a significant error to the point where it won't build? I'm not actually sure. Okay, cool. So yeah, this, between the middleware and the API endpoint, this gets you the user ID, the Clerk user ID. And then with that, and this is all secure, it uses a JWT. The JWT refreshes every minute. And so, yeah, like it only takes a millisecond on the back end and you get the user's ID. If you're doing any like auditing, sometimes it's also helpful to have the session ID. So the session ID kind of ties a user to a device. And so the session ID is there too, if you want to do any like audit logging type stuff. And yeah, I guess once you have this, what do you think I should do? Should I jump into the Stripe?
Well, we actually have a question from Christian here.
Cool.
And he asks, on the Clerk uses third-party JavaScript modal message. Yeah. There's a message that says redirect required, and asking whether or not that message is customizable.
So there's no need to customize it. It doesn't exist in production. So, and it doesn't exist in Chrome, and I think it won't exist anywhere before the end of the year. Basically what you're seeing there is everything in this demo so far has been on localhost 3000. But where, like, we didn't set up any backend, right? Like that step wasn't there. The backend that's kind of powering the session state and managing who's logged in is on a different domain. And it's actually on the Clerk front-end API domain, and that's in your environment file.
Oh, that's what that front-end key thing was. Got it.
Yeah. And so if you kind of view, let's go here, open up the network tab. I'm going to have to click refresh. And so basically all of the auth state is managed through these endpoints. So this is that front-end API domain. And this is how we're managing auth. In development, since this is a different domain than localhost 3000, we're using third-party cookies. We found a way to do it without third-party cookies, but bear with us for a couple months and just click through that on Stripe and Firefox, or not Stripe and Firefox, on Safari and Firefox. If you actually go to prod, and you look at those same API endpoints, so first of all, there's a lot less going on in the query string just because everything's more simplified. We're using an HTTP only cookie in prod. And the reason we're able to use an HTTP only cookie is because we have developers in prod set a CNAME to our API.
Got it.
So that's what's going on there. You cannot customize that redirect required thing, but your end users won't see it. So hopefully that's okay.
Cool. The other thing I noticed too was there were some webhooks. So that's like the middleware piece. And then if you wanted to be notified about different events that are firing when when the user uses that user button and then updates something, like maybe their phone number or something. And then you want to know like, oh, their phone number changed because now I have to go update it in my Twilio connector thing or something related to that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So in the dashboard, there's a webhook section. We're actually using a tool called Svix to power these, which is another company I'd say like on this thesis of provide entire UIs to people instead of just the APIs. Because Clerk didn't build this UI, and
wow,
we are grateful for them building it for us.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you can subscribe to. Organizations we haven't covered yet. The reason why is that there's no, well, I'll talk about it in a second. But yeah, so user created, deleted, updated, those webhooks are all there. In practice, only 20% of our users turn on webhooks. And so the common mode of operation is to just let Clerk handle your users table, your sessions table, and so on. And then for anything that's augmenting users, do it in-house. But if you want, they're available there for you.
So what I'm imagining now is like, okay, I'm going to set up an endpoint inside of Clerk that will let me know when a user is created, deleted, and updated. And when a user is created, I'm going to make an API call to Stripe to create the Stripe customer. And then when it comes back, I'm going to store both the Clerk user ID and the Stripe customer ID in a database table locally. And then that's the sort of join that you're talking about, right? Like, okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
You could either do it that way or like a just-in-time approach. So when a request comes in, basically here you would, query your database, see, hey, do I have a Stripe customer ID for this user ID yet? If I don't, go create one, save it, and then return, and you can do it all just in time. There is metadata on the Clerk object, so you could save it directly to the Clerk object if you want. But it's really just user preference of like, where do they want metadata to live?
Sure. So if you don't have a database, let's say that you wanted the Clerk to be your users table, basically, or like your database of users, then another thing that you could do is like, okay, when I receive the user.created event from Clerk, I will update that user object so they have the Stripe customer ID and like plop it on the metadata for that user object. And then I know like from now on, it should have Stripe customer ID.
Exactly. And I'm trying to see if I can remember exactly how to do this. This is what we changed.
Got it.
Let's try Clerk API dot update. Oh, no, it would be users. I feel like my TypeScript is failing me. Or I'm just totally having the wrong names here.
It wouldn't be a demo without it, right?
I know, right?
So in this part, are we looking at the Node SDK or are we looking at Clerk? Like when you installed the Next.js Clerk thing, did that also pull in the Node SDK?
I think the docs here are a little incomplete.
Got it.
And so, basically it is the Node SDK. Our Node SDK and our Edge SDK are kind of converging right now. And so the docs are in a little bit of a confusing state.
Yeah, so it looks like if you pull in Clerk from Clerk SDK node, then you can do like clerk.users. Something.
Yeah. It should be backwards compatible, so maybe I should just try that. I'm going to open up docs on a different screen here, so just bear with me a second.
Sure. So while you're doing that, Javier asked earlier, when do we do training in Spanish? We have had one or two videos in Spanish on the Stripe developers YouTube channel. So if you want to head over and check those out, they are pretty out of date. They're pretty old. But yeah, if that's something that you're interested in, we absolutely would love to create content in Spanish. And also if that is something that you are an expert in, then we would love to have you collaborate with us to create some Spanish content. I know that Mike going to the Dominican Republic, maybe fingers crossed, will make some good connections there, so we can make some Spanish content.
Yeah, I think so. Tengo que practicar, pero we'll work on it, I think.
Yeah.
All right. I think I hit a breakthrough here.
Nice.
So it was Clerk client, not Clerk API.
Got it.
Then users, update user, pass in the user ID, and then we have this public metadata. And you can either do public or private. I should just add a private here.
Cool.
Hello.
And is that just like the public metadata will be available on the front end with the, like inside the JWT stuff?
That's the idea, exactly. So if I go to localhost now, and I'm just going to I should just show it in the in React, actually. So if I go to my index, we can call user, import it. And then we'll just do div user, let's do JSON stringify it, maybe. What do I want here? Like null 2?
Yeah, that should do it.
Switch these to pre's.
There we go.
Okay. Now, user object.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, so here's my public metadata, and the private metadata isn't here. And that's exactly for the purpose of what you're saying. Like, all right, some data you do want on the front end. Public cannot be changed from the front end. It can only be set from the back end, but it can be read from the front end. There is a last one called unsafe metadata. And that one you can set on the front end. And it's for like, I would only really do that for like, I don't know, like an analytics use case or like a quick and dirty A/B test or something. But if you want, you can do unsafe metadata. I'm running out of
Foobar.
Hellos and worlds, yeah.
Oh yeah, you actually saw it update.
Yeah, it showed up right away.
I didn't even have to click. Yeah.
Whoa, that's cool.
So yeah, and so we definitely have customers that have just set the Stripe ID on public metadata, and then they can just work with that.
Sure, very cool.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's a pretty tidy demo, Colin. I'm curious. So, from the Clerk standpoint, so Next is supported. What other frameworks are supported?
Yeah, so let's check out our kind of just docs here. It's the easiest way to see. So as of right now, we have Next, Remix, just straight React if you're using straight React, Redwood, Gatsby, and Expo. So we do work with, the Expo tutorial does work with React Native as well. So if you're doing something on mobile, that should work for you.
Cool. Yeah. So kind of anywhere you're going to be writing your React, it feels like there's somewhere for Clerk to plug in.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I said this before the call, but if people think of us as Auth0 for React, I'll take it. I think we very much have invested, more in that ecosystem than I think any other auth vendor.
Yeah, super cool. So I see we're kind of getting towards the end of the hour. I want to make sure our friends who are watching, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure to ask Colin your questions before we get off the stream here. Colin, one question I have for you is, are there features for Clerk that you're excited about or that you're looking forward to bringing to life in the future?
Yes, organization management. That's the next big one for us. So basically everything you saw today, sign up, sign in, user profile, and even the user button, there's the organization side of it. So if you're a B2B SaaS, after someone signs up, the first thing they need to do is usually create an organization and then invite their team members and set their roles and permissions. Oftentimes they can create more than one organization, and then there's a little organization switcher in the top left, opposite the user button in the top right. And so we're going to provide that organization switcher component. We're going to provide the UIs to create an organization to manage people's roles and permissions. And that should be live in November. The APIs for it already exist. And so when I was going through the webhooks, you saw organizations referenced. And so that's what that's referring to. APIs are done. We're working on the React side of it. And that's really the biggest, short-term feature. But then it's just more of these integrations, right? Like I would love if Clerk, you go on the Clerk dashboard, you do Stripe Connect, and then we're automatically creating the Stripe customer objects for every user and for every organization. Because we'll have both sides of that. And then we can bring that redirect to checkout to the front end. Like that's kind of the path we're going down is like getting more into, so many things are user-centric is what I'll say. And so I think user.charge like used to be this thing that you had in your, I'm dating myself, in your Rails model, right? You'd have your user.rb, you'd have user.charge, user.email, all these user.things, user.verb. And we're kind of trying to provide that user.rb model as a service and taking a broad lens to it.
Yeah. I feel like it's easy to glance over how staggering that amount of work is and how cool it is to be able to like plug in an app to that, especially if you're building an Next.js app and you have a React Native mobile app and suddenly you're like on the web and on Android and on iOS and you have authentication with LinkedIn and Twitter and Google and you name it, like across the board. That's a lot of stuff that you don't have to do, so you can go and build your product, which is the thing that people want to use in the end anyway. Yeah, super cool.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't.
Questions come in?
Did not see any questions. We have a request for some French language content. We do have some French speakers, so we might be able to provide something like that. Christian, I'm curious kind of what topics you might want to see. Also, if you're watching this later and you have some requests for content or you have ideas or things that you want to learn about, please let us know down in the comments below. But yeah, again, thanks again so much, Colin. Really, really appreciate it. Any parting thoughts, Mike? Colin?
Yeah, Colin, my last question for you is, so assuming people have watched this tutorial and they're ready to go off and get running and start their journey with Clerk, where do they go?
It's just clerk.dev.
Cool.
Clerk.dev, there's a developers tab. If you want, you can join our Discord. We're pretty active in there. But yeah, go to clerk.dev, hit the docs and get going. It's really fast to get set up. I think we covered a ton of ground in this hour. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. You can also follow @ClerkDev on Twitter. I guess that's where we can stay tuned for updates.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Make sure to chase down Colin. Also, his Twitter handle's on the screen @tweetsbycolin. I'm sure he'd love to field your questions about Clerk, and CJ and I are always happy to help with Stripe stuff as well.
Absolutely. All right. Let's call it a show. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Colin.
Thank you.
Bye, friends.